And we're recording. All right, so Andrew is our speaker today, and he's been leading successful businesses since he was a teenager. Through the growth of these businesses, Andrew's discovered his passion of helping people and organizations be better and grow bigger. Ooh, this is awesome. Just what we need to hear, right, guys? No, I love it. Andrew enjoys spending time boating, and his most honed skill is building teams to achieve a common mission. So, take it away, Andrew. You are muted.
There we go.
Awesome.
So I appreciate you guys having me on. It looks like I've got screen sharing capabilities, so I'll do that here in a second. So first I want to introduce you guys to my little co-pilot here, my dog Davis.
I thought he was going to bring out a baby from under the table.
Yeah, no. If he barks during the presentation, I apologize. But
oh wow, that's a big one.
So yeah, the themes I heard when you guys are talking about the challenges you're having are procrastination, wanting to be perfected or perfection, which is the enemy of progress, right? So, children and distractions, family distractions, scheduling issues, and prioritization. So I'm going to try to touch on all of those today, and I'll try to point out some areas through the presentation where I think it's valuable for each of those things. So maybe you can take some pointers away from it. So you guys had talked about my bio, just a little bit more on that. So I own 4 businesses in the restaurant supply space, floor covering, installation and sales, and construction and disaster restoration. So, I built one business to be a $20 million company, and then we started expanding, making acquisitions into some smaller businesses. So time management is really critical to me. So that's kind of my that's my pedigree, I guess you could say, or the reason that I might be qualified to talk about it is because I've had to really learn how to spin a lot of plates at the same time, and that forced me into a routine that was bigger than I could be on my own. So I learned to leverage a lot of these tools. So I'm going to share my screen here. You guys see that?
Yep.
All right, cool. So this is the same training I give to my team at Paul Davis. So, some of this stuff is specific to our company, but I'll talk you through, some of the things that are different. So the agenda is to provide insight and advice on improving time management to be more effective and improve work-life balance. And the outcomes, I want all the attendees to have a better understanding of how to prioritize and plan to achieve more out of the same amount of time that you have. A couple of quotes from Seneca. And if some of you don't know what Stoicism is, I would suggest you look it up because it's a great tool for time management and also saying no to things, which we'll talk about. First one is we are always complaining that our days are few and acting as though there would be no end of them. The second is it is not that we have so little time, but that we lose so much. The life we receive is not short, but we make it so. We are not ill provided, but use what we have wastefully. So take those things away and have some thoughts about them over the next couple of days and think how they apply to you. And if you've got questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'm monitoring it, so I'm happy to answer questions as we go through this. So what's time? Oh, also, how much time do I have, by the way? Just want to make sure I'm staying on schedule.
You have about 30 minutes.
Okay, great. So what is time? It's the indefinite continued progress of existence and events in the past, present, and future regarded as a whole. It's the great equalizer because we all have the same amount of it. It's also a measure of efficiency, right? So miles per hour, words per minute, year to date. So these things are all measures of how far have we come in a certain amount of time and what were those metrics that we were trying to achieve. So it's really important when you look at time, you look at it as a resource, just like money, right? And I always tell people I can always make more money, but I can't make more time. So if you take my time away from me, I'm gonna be a lot more pissed if you steal my time than 20 bucks out of my wallet, because I can make that back. But so I'm really big on looking at time as a resource, just like you would look at it as anything else. It's your most important resource. But if it's used right, it's also an organizational assistant. So you can use time to either help you or hurt you. And somebody had mentioned writing things down the night before. Well, that's all that's doing is it's taking the resource that you have tomorrow and basically putting it in buckets so that you can make sure that none of it gets wasted, right? If you don't think about that and you just let things come at you, that resource is going to go away. So what's priority? Something given or meriting attention before competing alternatives. So everything is competing for your time. So I think it was Greg who said something about being a small business owner and having all of these things take time away from you and not having enough time for them. The truth is we all have the same amount of time. It's just a question of what you give your time to. And there's always going to be competing alternatives. So we have to make choices to sacrifice. And that's where the decisions are. There's another Seneca quote I didn't put on there, but it's I think it's something like easy choices, hard life, or hard choices, easy life, right? Saying no to things and turning things down and choosing what's more important than something else is actually the hardest part about time management. So if you're good at that, chances are you're going to have time for things. So what are the elements to consider when managing time? Your goals, your relationships, waste, and environment. So what I mean by that is, like, what are your goals? If you really looked at what you did last week, hopefully everybody here has written down goals. If you don't, please start there. But last week, if you looked at the time you spent, what did it do making progress on your goals or the relationships that you want to develop? And how much of that time did you waste? And then the fourth part being environment. What I mean by that is the task that you're trying to accomplish or the goal that you're trying to achieve, is it conducive within the environment you're in? So for example, somebody had mentioned kids and family distractions and things like that. So if you're trying to get something done that's deep thought and you have your family around, probably a bad idea, right? And so if you look at your schedule and your calendar and you schedule yourself to be in a place where maybe those distractions don't exist, environment is incredibly critical to time. And it has to do with using your smartphone versus your laptop versus paper and pen. You need to look at what you're trying to achieve and making sure that the environment you're in is conducive to it. A lot of people don't think about that enough. So I always point that out because that's a really important thing to consider when you're trying to get something done. Not only do you have the time for it, but is the environment I'm going to be in going to maximize my efficiency to get what I want done? What are the elements to consider when prioritizing? So necessity. This is one that you really need to come to grips with. And I always look at it and ask myself, if I don't do this today, or if I don't do this week, is it going to change the direction of my life or my business or the relationship I'm working on or whatever, right? And if the answer is no, then it's probably not that important to you. And a lot of times we say things are necessary or we give them priority, even though they're not really that important because we have this like obsession with getting things done. And you got to be really careful because if you don't look at your goals and relationships and the relationship with yourself too and your mental health and all that, it's really easy to say everything's necessary. But you have to sacrifice things. You have to throw them away in order to actually do the things that are important to you. So consequences. If I don't do this, what's going to happen? So if you have to submit your taxes to the IRS and it's like the morning of the 15th, right? You probably should get that thing postmarked because there's a consequence there. But if you skip that meeting that you were supposed to have, or I don't want to say skipping a one-on-one, but if you have a one-on-one that day and you're not going to get your taxes in because of that, the taxes are probably more important, right? So like you have to understand what the consequences are. A lot of times we put these like consequences on ourselves that don't actually exist, which is another great Seneca quote to look up, which is, basically that we suffer more in our minds than we do in reality. That's me paraphrasing it, but that's the truth. You put these consequences on yourself because a lot of times you think, oh, if I don't do this, this person's going to be mad at me or this, and we hold ourselves to a high standard. And in turn, we let all these other things get done that may have benefited us or our businesses. And the next thing you know, you don't have time for them. So really understand what the consequences are and be real about that. So priority, we talked about a little bit, and environment we already talked about, but those are things you need to consider when you're prioritizing things. If you're driving down the road and you're trying to text message somebody, that's probably a bad idea, right? Because you might end your life at that point. But regardless of that, you're just not going to be efficient with that task. You're going to be distracted. So look at anything the same way. If you're doing something in front of a television, probably going to be distracted. Like you need to make sure that environment's right for the type of task you're doing. So how do you prioritize? I have a 3-step thing that I do all the time. And, Greg, you were talking about being a small business owner and having all these things to do. Well, eliminate, delegate, and elevate. These are the 3 things that I focus on every morning before I start my week. I first eliminate the tasks that I don't need to do. So I go through those exercises I showed you on the last slide. And then I take my task list and basically I eliminate the things that I don't need to do. So if you have a list of things, the first thing you should always do is knock things off that you're like, this isn't important. And if you have a list, the other thing is if you keep your things on a list, they become less important over time. Like, so I'll put something on today, I'll write some note in my notebook or whatever right here. And basically I'll be like, oh man, that's an important thing. And then 4 days later, I'll look at it again and be like, what was I thinking? It's really not important, or I don't need to do that. And so eliminate those things that you don't need to do. Not everything you write down needs to get done. So you really need to evaluate that first, eliminate it. And it's hard to do. I don't want to say it's easy. It's not. It's hard to do. So how do you delegate? Now, if you've got people that you can delegate to, whether that be your direct reports or maybe subcontractors or things like that, what's on the list that you can hand off? I always do this the first thing in the morning because I want to make sure that I'm maximizing the time for my direct reports to be able to handle the things that they need to handle. If I start delegating at 3 p.m., I can't expect that person to have it done the same day. So first thing in the morning, I look for my delegate things after I eliminate it and I pass them off. The other key is when you're going to delegate something, make sure you transfer both the task and the knowledge. And calls are generally better than email, so you can explain what you're doing unless it's like a repetitive task that they've done before. But it's easy to delegate things and do it poorly and then have it boomerang back and hit you in the face. Make sure that you're clear on what you're transferring over and, and explain it to somebody. So then the last thing is elevate. So with whatever's left, prioritize it. Remember the consequences, the relationships, the goals, and limit your priorities to what you can possibly focus on. So the night before, if I'm trying to plan my day out and I put 10 things on there that are going to take an hour, I probably won't get them done. So I need to be realistic. That's where that's where the whole prioritization thing comes. What are the consequences of not doing this? How important is this really to my goals or my relationships? Evaluate things within that lens and then pass it on. And also if everything's important, nothing is. So this is key. Like we're in today's world, you're going to have emails, text messages thrown at you, all that. The most important thing before you start this entire process is knowing how to say no. And I have a lot more success really thinking about the things that I say no to than the things I say yes to. Because there's a lot of people that come at me with requests or meetings or whatever, and I've got to say no and say, no, look, unfortunately I don't have the time, or I can't make the time for this because it's not a high enough priority for my goals. And I'll just explain that to somebody if that's the case. But you have to say no in order to get through all this. So what's the process around managing time? That was the process around managing the things that take up your time. Once you have that list, which is basically this prioritizing step, and you've prioritized things, you need to plan it, execute it, and then recap and review. So when you prioritize things, you have to know your goals. You have to know what's important to you. These are the things we just talked about. What are the consequences? What do you need to maintain relationships? So one note here is like with your family relationships, and COVID's probably brought us all a lot closer, to be honest, because you're spending more time probably with your family than you did, when you were going to the office or whatnot. So I always look at the frequency of the important people in my life. Like, when's the last time that I interacted with this person and what did I do? I try to take time every week or month to reflect on that, to make sure that I'm maintaining those relationships, because it's easy to let them come secondary. And you have to be real with yourself. You'll never be able to get everything you want done. It's not possible. So you need to eliminate. So when you're planning things, I think Christina said, does a calendar count as a to-do list in the chat? And the answer is it can, but I would say that it's probably more of a planning tool for what you're trying to prioritize, and you should keep them separate. But what you do on your planning tool, which we'll go over here in a second, is chunk your activities and block your time. What I mean by that is if you have phone calls to do, a lot of times it's better just to get all those phone calls scheduled in a block so you can hammer them out one after another, and then you can spend the rest of your time on some other task. And that has to do with environment too, right? It's not good to text message while you're driving, but if you can and you got, hands free, why not make those calls while you're on the road to try to try to maximize your opportunities? That's an environment case. When you're in a car, you're doing nothing except for thinking or talking on the phone. Like those are the only two options you have. So you may as well use it for something useful. So chunk your activities and block your time for those things that you're going to be doing. And I'll show you an example of that. Also, do you have any unavailable time? So if you have your kids at home and you're the one that's taking care of them from 2 to 4, block that time off on your calendar for the upcoming week or the upcoming 2 weeks or whatever, but reserve the time you need for yourself, your family, things that people can't take away from you ahead of time so that they don't. You also have to consider travel time. A lot of times we put things on our calendar like one after another, and I always build in two things, either prep time or travel time. So like if I have the Net 2.0 meeting coming up, I got here about 5 minutes early because I wanted to make sure all the technology worked and all that. I wouldn't have scheduled myself 8 to 9, 9 to 10. It would be 8 to 8:50, leave 10 minutes of prep time, show up at 9. So that's something we always make a mistake. Like if you leave your calendar open for people to schedule to you and you let them do that, you're never going to be able to properly prepare for the thing that you're going to be doing or recap from it. So you have to have some time in between. That extra 10 minutes or 5 minutes that you're going to add to your calendar, believe me, it won't get you anywhere putting that into your existing appointments versus actually prepping or reflecting for the important things that you're doing. Also, problems will occur. So build in flexibility. Somebody mentioned distractions, like when things get thrown at you during the day or, unexpected things. Build in time for it. That way, and I always tell my project managers this, like if a customer calls you at 10 a.m. and they've got a problem on their project, if it's not an emergency, tell them I have time between 1 and 2 p.m. where I'm going to be able to sit down and evaluate this. So give me till that time to look at this and I'll call you back around then. That way you don't make a bad decision in a short time period where you're actually like either emotionally frustrated because you're dealing with something else or you don't have the information to solve it. So execute. So once you've planned, you need to execute on it. So somebody said evaluate your plan the night before and adjust. That's what I'm talking about. That's a great tool. The night before, make sure your day is planned out for the next day and that it's focused on those goals, those relationships, all the things you need to do. If you don't have time on your calendar for your goals the next day, you should probably think about, well, what am I doing that I don't need to do? Eat the frog early. What I mean by that is the first thing you do, make sure it's the biggest, most uncomfortable thing you have to do for the day. Once you get that out of the way, it's amazing how the rest of the day will free up because your mind is off of whatever that was. Uncomfortable conversations, maybe it's a big project, whatever, do that first. Constantly review how your time's spent. So like, again, look at your week or your day and make sure that you spent it the way that you intended and then it's focusing on those goals and relationships you're trying to develop. And take notes throughout the day. This is how I do it. I keep notes in a notebook every day. Just write them down as things come. It's the most accessible thing and it's always in front of me and I find writing helps my retention. So I do that. I actually scan every page every night and it's usually just a couple pages a day. But I scan it into OneNote and I organize it by day so that if I ever need to get it on my phone, it's right there in front of me. So that's really my system, but it's really important to take notes throughout the day because your memory is probably as good as mine, which is not very good. And so I have to use something to help me. Recap. This is really important. So once you get to the end of a day or a week, you need to look back and see how you spent your time and was it spent intentionally? What could I have done better? I also, at the end of the day, recap everything on my phone, my conversations I've had and my text messages just to make sure I don't need to do any follow-up. Generally, any meetings or conversations I've been in, I email a 3-point bullet point email back to that meeting to say, here's the things I took away from it. Here's the common understandings that I want you to have. And that helps a lot because that creates alignment with the people that you're working with or talking to. The reason that's important for time management is because other people can waste your time by boomeranging those things back to you if you're not clear with what you expect. So make sure that that recap is not only internal, it can be external too. So what's the process around managing time in a schedule? this is an example of how I train some of our estimators. So like for me, exercise in the morning and meditation is important. So that's something that I put on my calendar. Here's my drive time with the phone calls that I'm going to make. Here's answering my emails or flex time. And what I mean by that is like, you know, if something comes up, I can spend this 8 to 9 a.m. instead of answering emails, I can spend that on that issue that popped up. Same thing at 3 p.m. But, you know, I basically have just categorized this by like my availability for scoping out new projects. You know, my lunch is in there, so I make sure I eat lunch, right? And, you know, on Wednesdays, I'm going to have lunch with my wife or whatever. So that's in there. So this is what I'm saying. And when you're planning out your week, make sure you've pre-planned out your time and that you've included time for those flex blocks that you might need in case something goes wrong. So what are some of the tools that we use? It could be our Apple Watch or like an, you know, digital watch or your phone. A calendar is a time management tool, although I would say using it as a to-do list can be disastrous sometimes because things can get just thrown on there and not prioritized right. I use a combination of this journal as well as an app. The app I use is Todoist, but there's a lot of them out there. All I would suggest is that you're able to put both dates and priorities in that app because some things are priorities because of the dates, like the IRS thing I talked about. You need to file your taxes, but it really doesn't become important until April 14th. You know, the other things that can be high priorities are high priorities, but they're not date driven. So make sure that whatever you're using, it has a both priority and a date function. And if you're using paper, I suggest you look up bullet journaling. That's a great way to keep track of, keep a to-do system without using a digital solution. So I would suggest both of those things. Keep in mind, tools only make it easier to manage time. The most important tool is discipline. If you're not disciplined about your routine and you're not doing it over and over again in the same way, and also reflecting and making it better, it's not going to be, it's not going to matter because your disciplines, the time management's not going to matter because your discipline's not there. So prioritizing. So a little bit deeper in this. So like your goals, we call them GSR, goal setting and review in our companies, but where your goals is your agenda if you had a road trip, right? So like that's where you want to go. That's where you want to get to by this date. Your calendar, the way you lay it out, that's like your map. Your task and email management are your mile markers. So like the tasks that you put on your task list should be little mile markers on your road trip to get to where you're going. And it's really important. Like if you put the wrong directions into your GPS, you're not going to end up where you want to go. So it's really key that you make sure all those little mile markers are there. And so again, there's always, and so keep in mind the bad tasks and emails are like the pee breaks and flat tires, right? So when something gets thrown at you and you just put it on your task list and you don't need to do it, like those are the things that slow you down. You need to really figure out how to eliminate those in your day and learn how to say no. So every day I write what my goal is for the day in the journal. I make sure that my tasks and projects are delegated early. I handle my high priority items immediately after doing my planning for the day, which is eating the frog. I block my time off for projects. So if I have like deep thought type of projects that I need to work on for a long period of time, I make sure that time's actually blocked off and I'm unavailable. And then we talked about the recap and keeping notes. So work-life balance, it's kind of a dumb term. Balance means something different to everybody, but it should be called how to achieve my goals in both my personal life and my business career. So you really have two choices. You can either build your life around your career or you can build your career around your life, right? Something has to be the most important thing to you. Both are okay. It's just different priorities for different people. So it's really important to know which is more important to you and which one's going to come first, and then be very like decisive about that. So the 9 to 5 versus the 9 to 11 versus the 1 to 5 and 9 to midnight. I'm very, very flexible in all of our companies about people and how they work because I just believe that people should have the right to decide that. And you need to, in my opinion, you can't really switch from one to the other. You need to decide what works best for you. Some people operate well in a 9 to 5 environment and then shut down. Other people operate better by working part of the morning, relaxing midday, and then going and doing work again and then doing that same cycle. I'm one of those people. If you put me at a desk, I actually don't have an office at any of our offices. I work from here at my house, because if you put me at a desk and lock me down, I don't do well. So, but I have like my sister Alexis, if you guys know her, she's the opposite. Like Alexis needs to be like at the desk and like needs to have a start time and an end time. So it's important to do that. So planning. I talked about planning your week ahead. Make sure you plan time for distractions, chunk things. And what I mean by that is like maybe there's things I need to do at home. Well, you can add tags to your journal or to your planner so that you have so that you have the location where it's best to do that task. So whenever you're at work, if all those things need to be done in your office, you can pull up all those tasks or filter by it, so you can make sure you're thinking about your environment. Use your road time. So we talked about driving, make sure that that's not wasted. It's either should be used on thought or conversation. And emails are the number one source of distraction in our life. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit here. We'll talk about that in a second. But so I use mornings. This is for planning. You can either use early mornings or late night, but review your calendar. Have any priorities changed? Are there any anticipated interruptions? You need to exercise because it gets your mind going and your body. The two are connected. If you're not exercising, I can guarantee you your mind is not going to be optimal. So make sure you book time for that, or yoga or meditating or something, whatever you enjoy, but get your body going. And then attack the biggest problems first early in the morning. And I always say you should have 3 priorities: must do today, should do today, and want to do today. That's the 3 ways I prioritize things. And I always hit my must do's first. That's eating the frog. So we talked about email a little bit here, but I prioritize my emails. Right now, I actually throw them to Todoist and prioritize them in my to-do list, but it's really important to make sure that you categorize and organize your emails so that you don't just address them when they come in. One of the things I do is when I get an email, I just run through all of my emails about 2 or 3 times a day, and I prioritize them. I don't take action on them. I empty my inbox and I prioritize it with tags, and then I go back later and focus on them in priority instead of just going one to the next. This is a great tactic for saying no, because when you run across something that you don't want to do, you don't need to respond to it right away. You just save it for later and see if it's still important. So dealing with interruptions. Again, we talked about environment, but don't be afraid to say no. You can do it in a nice way. Don't let people distract you unless it's a priority. So the most successful people in the world are generally successful because they said yes to the right things and no to the wrong ones. And you have to make sure you know what you're trying to get to and say yes or no according to your principles and your goals. But you have to say no. So choosing the right medium for communication too. Don't email somebody about a conversation. If you're going to have a conversation about something and like dig into it and get feedback or whatever, make sure you call them. Have a voice conversation or a face-to-face or whatever, because a lot of your time, if you look at email chains, is wasted in like misunderstanding. So it's really important to choose the right medium for communicating. And also I tell my employees this: don't be afraid to say no to your boss. So like if your boss comes to you and puts something on your plate that's not in line with your goals, your objectives, and they just drop it on you, and there's something more important for you to do, tell them no, but you can do it in a nice way, right? Like, no, this isn't going to work for me. I need to do this first, but I'll get this to you by Tuesday of next week. A lot of people are afraid to say no to their boss. And for me, if you can't say no to me, then I probably shouldn't have put you in the position that you're in, because you're just going to be accepting everything from everybody. You're never going to get the important things done. So when we talk about reviewing, failing once is a mistake. Failing twice is a lack of discipline. When you're reviewing what you did today or last week and you're looking at your time management, find out why it went wrong. Identify the issues, evaluate that, and plan for next week on how you're not going to let that happen again, and then execute it. Make sure every morning you're implementing changes to your schedule, or your routine. So you can't have good time management skills without self-discipline. So if you don't have self-discipline, it's a choice. You have to make sure you work on that first. Review your calendar at the end of the week. Again, evaluate your relationships when you looked at that calendar. Who did I spend time with? Is there people I should have spent time with that I didn't? If you find mistakes, make sure you adjust it for your next week. And the other thing is always be learning. So use your downtime to either exercise your body or your mind. Make sure you read, make sure you work out, eat well. Those things all have to do with how productive you are within your week. There's some additional resources here you can use. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is a good book for that. Tim Ferriss's podcast is also a great one for time management. He's also got a great book called Tools of Titans, I think, is one that is great for time management tools. Getting Things Done is a time management system that you could look at. Bullet journal, like I talked about, if you're a paper person, that's a great way to look at time management. And then I wrote up a little guide for our team members called Highly Effective that goes through task management and email management. So I can send that out to you guys after the meeting. Some of the software we use: Gmail, Microsoft OneNote, Evernote, Notion, Todoist, Noseby, Wunderlist, just reminders using Google or Apple, Google Calendar. These are all software tools you can use. So I know there's some questions here. So the virtual world, Christina asked, the virtual world has changed that a bit in comparison to prep and travel time. Would you say those apply still? So yeah, the answer is I think they apply. I always prep right before every meeting, even if it doesn't seem necessary. The 5 minutes before every meeting is so useful for making sure I maximize what I get out of that meeting. And one of the other things I did, if you noticed when we started the presentation, was I had a purpose and outcomes. And I always do that with every meeting. I state what the intended purpose is and what our attendees or what I want to get out of that. And so I think about that before I go into any meeting to make sure I'm not just spending the time with somebody, but in doing it intentionally. I think that's important. Alexis asked how about phones. So many people take too much of my time on the phone. Even when I say this is my time, people go over. I can be a little brash about this, but I really don't care. Like, again, if you're taking up my time, we both better be getting value out of it. And I'm just pretty clear to people on the phone that even clients, when I'm talking to them, I'm like, look, I've got something I've got to get done in the next 5 minutes. I need to jump off the phone. I apologize. But one of the tools that you can use here is recapping that conversation with the bullet pointed email. So if I feel like I didn't get everything I needed to get out, but we had a conversation, I'll make sure I eat the frog first and talk about the most important or uncomfortable things first. And then if I've got extra things, I'll always email at the end of the day. I look at my calendar and I look at those, like if I went back to my blocks, I see that I had a call with somebody at 10 o'clock. I'll just drop an email to the attendees of there and I'll say, hey, here's the 3 things I wanted to get across in this email. It takes 30 seconds, but that clarity is so important. So I would say that's a great tool for minimizing the amount of time you spend on the phone, but maximizing the returns you're going to get from it. Do not this is the art of saying no. Don't let somebody take up your phone time when you call them. I pick up the phone and I say, and I hate small talk. Like I'm probably the worst networker in the world because of this, but I hate small talk. So I'll pick up the phone, call somebody and say, hey, hey, Sarah, it's good talking to you. How's your day going? Okay, good, great. Here's the things I want to talk about today. Here's the 2 things. I don't like get into the chit chat thing. And then if they're like, I'll say, do you want to get anything out of this call? Okay, great. I'm writing those things down. Let's knock this out, get done with it. And again, if I don't have time, I'll say, look, I'm sorry, I've got to jump off. I've got something more important to do. But I appreciate your time. I'll recap this with an email. So that helps out a lot. In sales, we would call that upfront contract and mutual agreement of sorts. Yeah. So look, the other thing is your time is not more important than somebody else's, no matter who you are, because you both have 24 hours in the day. And so when we're talking about a contract, right, you're basically agreeing on terms so that it's mutually beneficial for both parties, hopefully. Otherwise, you shouldn't sign it. And it's the same way when you're about to have a phone conversation or you're having a meeting with somebody. If you're going to request somebody else's time, I don't care if it's the President of the United States or, or somebody who's, just a friend. Like, that time is critical for both of you. So you need to respect it, no matter if it's a subordinate relationship or if it's a peer or it's somebody that's a supervisor in the hierarchical relationship. So I made sure that we're clear on what the intentions are. So any more questions before I wrap up? Again, I'll leave you with this slide if you want to take a photo of it, of these other resources. I hope that was effective for you. And, again, the outcomes, I'll give you guys a second to take a picture of this, but the outcomes that I wanted you guys to take away from this is for you guys to have a better understanding of how to prioritize and plan to achieve more out of the same amount of time. So I know it's a lot in a short period, but research some of those resources and those theories online, and you'll find a lot more and deeper thought about them. And I'd encourage you to go down that rabbit hole. So thanks for listening to me, and I appreciate you guys giving me your time.
Thank you, Andrew. I actually had one question. You had mentioned on there bad task, like a busted tire or something bad happening. Can you elaborate more on that, and how would you, I guess, time manage something like that?
Sure, I would eliminate it, because by definition, it's something that you probably don't need to do, right? Like, and this is why I'm saying determining what's necessary in your life. The way to evaluate that is just to say, again, if I don't do this, is it going to change the trajectory of my business or my relationship with somebody or my personal life? And if the answer is no, then you should probably turn it down. You should probably decline the task. And what I mean by bad tasks are like, okay, so for example, somebody wants to set up a meeting about something that can be easily answered over email, or I know doesn't require that. I'm just going to turn that down and send them the email back with the response they need and say, we don't need to meet. That now eliminated something future in my calendar and gave me back some time. Other things are like, something goes wrong. Let's just say something goes wrong on a customer's project, but I trust the person that's handling it. I could put it on my calendar tomorrow morning to review that project, but I would have to evaluate how important it was to the trajectory of my business. Like, if that goes wrong, how important is that customer to me? Am I putting it on my calendar just because I think it's important right now? That's a bad task. Trying to think of one more example that's not so high level, but let's say, actually, we deal with this a lot. So if somebody hits me up on LinkedIn and wants to meet and wants to have a one-on-one or something, I always have to evaluate how important that person is to me. And a lot of times people just say yes to those invitations, because a lot of people say, networking is networking, right? Like, you get to know everybody. And the truth is, yeah, probably it's good to know everybody, but not if it's going to eat into your goals or your existing relationships that matter to you. And when one of those things come up, like, again, it's just an evaluation of asking yourself whether I say yes or no to this. And what I mean by a bad task is, don't let something go onto your task list without an intentional decision from you. Not just I'm going to do this because I wrote it down, but I want to do this. Like, it's going to make a difference for me. So.
Thank you, Andrew.
Sure.
Okay. Let me go ahead and stop the recording.